Hello and welcome to the Alliance Pro Wrestling Network special interview. I am your host, Lewis Carlin, and man, oh man, I am so excited today because on my show, we have a former AWA World Heavyweight Champion, WWE Hall of Famer, a living legend. I'm talking about the man that I hated with a passion in 1980, the living legend himself, Larry Zbyszko. Larry, welcome to the show, my friend.
Well, thank you, Lewis. I appreciate it. It's nice to meet you, and I like it. I like talking to the fans. I mean, wrestling fans are the greatest fans of all.
Well, I am a huge fan, and I really appreciate you coming on today. And I had to begin with this. I read the book, Adventures in Larryland. You know, you were a pilot. You used to fly from city to city, town to town, and you used to pull ribs on other wrestlers. You used to turn that engine off, and you would nosedive. First of all, why would you do that? How many times did you do it? And how loud did Tony Atlas actually scream when you did it to Tony Atlas?
Tony Atlas was the loudest screamer of them all. Okay. And I mean, a couple of years in the business, I mean, we lived in a car. You know, I mean, we drove from town to town, and this was in the Northeast, so you got Boston, Philly, New York, the traffic. And I said, gee, so I wound up getting a private pilot's license. Like in maybe 1975, something like that. And I would fly myself to all the towns. So instead of, you know, a 4 or 5 hour drive and an hour and a half, boom, I'd be there. You know, someone would pick me up and take me to the town. And after the show, I'd take off and I'd be home at midnight, and the other guys would be coming in at 4 a.m, you know. But you know, I mean, flying was like driving. It was actually easier because once you got up there and you set your heading and sit there, you go, okay, well, I'll be there in an hour and 20 minutes. So you just sit there with nothing really to do. You know, you're just going along and looking down, and it was freedom like a bird. I mean, it was great. But then it got boring. But then a couple of guys would come with me. I'd take the guys with me, you know, and but to break the monotony, sometimes I'd pull ribs on. Yeah. Like I'd be cruising along and I'd see a puffy cloud ahead of me, and you're really not supposed to fly in puffy, you know, in big clouds, but a little puffy cloud, no big deal. So I'm going through this puffy cloud, and I got Tony Atlas with me, and I cut back the choke, so the engine went boom, 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 and then stopped. I see the propeller, and then it goes, you know, dead quiet. There's no engine noise. And all of a sudden I went, oh my God, and I'm pushing the pedals of the plane sideways and going down. I go, oh my God, we're gonna die. And Atlas is screaming. He was the loudest screamer of the guys. There was a couple of guys I took that flew with me a bunch, Tiger Conway Jr., Pete Sanchez, and some other guys. And they kind of got the hang of it. Like if I shut the engine up, they go, put the engine out, we know it's a rib. Well, okay. But one good rib I did was with Tony Garea. Okay. We were going to go from New Haven to Albany, New York, which was like a 3.5 hour drive. So I told Tony like a couple of days before, I said, oh, Albany. I said, I didn't mention the town. I said, you know, Monday, I'll drive Monday, whatever day it was, you know. He went, oh, okay, what time are you going to pick me up? And I said, well, it's not far. I'll pick you up about 3:30. Okay. So then Monday morning, I get a call from Garea, who's freaking out. Because he goes, hey, you dumb bastard, we're in Albany tonight. Well, you pick me up at 3:30, we'll never make the town. And I went, no, we'll make the town easy. Don't worry, I got the plane. Dead silence. You've got the plane? Because he would not fly with me. Okay. You know, I asked him before, and he wouldn't go flying. He wouldn't fly with me. So I pulled a rib on him by getting him stuck, so he had no choice. So I pick him up at the house, didn't say a word to me. Drove to the little airport, got in the plane. He's sitting there pouting, didn't say a word to me. We take off, you know, fly hour, 15 minutes, we're in Albany. Guy picks us up, drives us to the arena, and Tony's still not saying a word. But he flew back with me anyway. We had a tag match or something, left the building, and we get in the plane and we're flying back. And now on the way back, he's starting to lighten up. He says, well, what is this thing? I said, well, that's the altimeter. That's how high we're, 7,500 feet. What's this thing? I said, well, that's just the fuel tank gauges. You got 2 tanks, you can flip it over, And it was funny when we landed. Then Tony, about a week later, he took a couple of lessons and was thinking of getting a private pilot's license.
Okay.
But he never did. But the shock of him, me swerving him to have to get on the plane, he wanted to kill me for the first few hours.
You mentioned Tony. You and Tony Garea are actually a great, great tag team. Who put you guys together, and why do you think you guys click so well together?
Well, you know what? That's when I first started. And they brought me in. And in those days, there was no school practice. I was a good amateur wrestler, and right before this, Bruno sent me off to Vancouver for 6 months. So I wrestled under a different name so I could get experience. And I was taught a lot of the old shooter hooks by a guy named John Foley, a little old guy. Okay. He's a guy from England that taught Carl Gotch and Billy Robinson. And then when I came back, I was kind of a green new guy, young, 22 years old or so. And I was pretty good. It came to me naturally, and I wrestled for years and was a big fan. So they teamed me up with Garea so I could get, more knowledge, as we went with a guy that had a little more experience. And me and Tony clicked as a team. 2 young, good-looking guys, and we had great opponents. The Valiant Brothers, Fuji and Tanaka, and then the Lumberjacks at the end. That was a cartoon. But it just clicked, and it worked out good for a while. It was easy, and me and Tony would drive together, and like I said, then I got with the flight.
Well, would you say Tony Garea was you've teamed with many different wrestlers, Arn Anderson, Haystack Calhoun. Where would you say Tony Garea ranks? Was he your favorite tag team partner, or was he amongst your favorite?
Well, you know what? It's hard to say favorite because he was just the first guy. Like when I first started, they put us together. But Tony was excellent in the ring. He was very good in the ring. So it was easy and fun, great guy. But I didn't want to be a tag team wrestler. It was just kind of get some experience. And then I broke away with the Bruno's protege thing, and then turned on Bruno. And, and then my whole, for 20 years of being like the most hated guy, back in the days when people really hated you, I never wanted to be a tag team guy because you made more money and you got better billing and a chance to be a star if you were a single guy. And I did a couple of special teams, like with Calhoun, teamed a couple times with Andre, but it wasn't a tag team thing. It was a once in a blue moon, when they brought him into territory kind of thing. And I was a single guy. And to make a long story short, through all the new era changes, I wound up in WCW. And I was like 40, 41 years old. So you're getting to the point of being beat to snot, for almost 20 years in the ring. And I was lucky. I only had a couple knee scopes, but never, of course, we weren't flipping off the top turnbuckle and crashing through tables and stuff like you're doing today.
Of course.
So I went there, and they put me and Arn together as a tag team. And at my age, I really didn't mind because I'm thinking, hey, I had a great career, 20 years, and Arn was great. He's a great guy, and he was a great tag team guy because he was, in the Four Horsemen and always teaming with somebody. And me and Arn had a great time on the road together. And the other thing was, in those days, which was like 91, 92, whatever it was, 93, the audience was already changing to where if guys went out there and did something stupid, that fans, instead of, having heat or something, they go, boring.
Yeah.
They were already listening to dirt sheets and that crap. But when me and Arn walked out as the enforcers, it changed. The people went, oh, they really hated us. They got that emotional involvement. And it felt like when me and Arn walked out in the early 90s together as the Enforcers, it felt like you were back in the 70s and 80s when the people believed and got, into it. And so it was good. And then what happened was interesting because I never planned to be a broadcaster. Never entered my mind. So me and Arn were teaming and they started the Dangerous Alliance.
Yeah.
This is when Bill Watts came in, and Bill was kind of an a-hole.
Okay.
And he was the kind of guy that was proud of being an a-hole. He knew he was an a-hole and he was proud of it. But he put the group together, and his idea at that time was anybody over 40 should just get all beat up by the new young guys, which in some cases were smart, but he just wanted to push Eric Watts.
Okay.
So, and I didn't like being in a group of 5 guys, even though, it was Stunning Steve Austin, who became, Stone Cold, and Rick Rude, who was great, but then, died. Paulie starting off, who was a great old school manager, talks good. But I didn't want to be in a group, so I said to the TBS people, I said, oh, my knee hurts. I think I tore a little cartilage, which I did. So I went up to get another knee scope. And TBS was a great company. They paid for it. And now we're in the early 90s at the time when Turner was giving away money like he was printing it in the basement. These big contracts came into play between the WWE and WCW and that. And I was sitting home recouping a couple months with the knee surgery. And I got a call one day from one of the executive producers who said, hey, Larry, can you do us a favor? Jesse the Body Ventura, he quit and was going back to Minnesota to run for mayor or something. Can you help us out and come down to the studio and voice over a couple of pre-tape shows?
Sure.
So I went, yeah, what the hell? I'll come down. So I went down and voiced over, and I don't know if it was with JR or Tony, I can't remember. But I voiced over a couple of shows. And after that, this executive producer comes running into the room and he goes, Larry, you're the greatest color guy we've ever heard. You want to do the color commentating on our shows? We'll give you this much a year. And when they told me how much they wanted to pay me, with a contract as an employee, I almost fell off the chair. It was more money than I ever made wrestling because it was just that weird timing when money was like nothing. TBS was just giving it away, and Vince had to get contracts so guys wouldn't jump back and forth. So I said, hell yeah, and that was a good thing because I didn't get any injuries, being over 40, I wasn't in the ring, but it gave me television publicity to reach a couple new generations of fans along the way. And of course, the New World Order at the end of 97 and that was, super hot. And I'm the one that programmed the beginning and got involved. And when Eric wanted to get involved, I programmed all that. So it worked out great for me. So I had 10 years of working a day and a half a week, making more money than ever as an employee.
Yeah, you can't.
I never planned on being a broadcaster.
Yeah, you can't beat that. You can't beat that. But if you don't mind, can we go back to 1980? Because I really want to talk to you about 1980. Bruno, I remember it like it was yesterday. I remember I was watching on TV. My grandfather, big Bruno fan, used to go to the Garden in the 60s. He actually got me into pro wrestling because I was at his house one day and running around. I was like 7. He goes, Louis, sit down. Bruno Sammartino is coming on. Do you know who Bruno is? I'm like, no. I'm like, well, sit down. He's coming on. He was like ordering me to sit down because Bruno's coming on. So 1980, when the match was announced that you're taking on Bruno, my grandfather didn't trust you. My grandfather said, I don't trust that Larry. He's going to do something to my Bruno. I was like, no, Grandpa, it's going to be a friendly match between two buddies. And then of course you turn on him, hit him with the chair 3 times. And I'm watching like this at home. My hand over my mouth, my eyes are as big as, so I couldn't believe what I was watching. And you were Larry Zbyszko to my grandfather, but you turned into that son of a bitch Zbyszko to my grandfather.
I was the most hated man alive for a while.
Man, that was I remember it like it was yesterday. So you came up with the idea to turn on Bruno, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
Well,
you came up with the idea.
Kinda. I came up with an idea because I was at the point now where I was in the business 6 years, maybe but I was known as Bruno's protege.
Yeah.
And Bruno had just recently retired after breaking his neck with Stan Hansen, and he was doing the commentary with Vince. And I was the guy at 240, 45 pounds, big enough to be a pro wrestler in those days, but not a 300-pound, villain guy like George Steele or somebody. But I needed a way to get a break. And I knew from everything I've learned that if anybody could get Bruno back in the ring one more time, the fans would go nuts. Because what happened was the fans didn't want Bruno to retire yet. I mean, Bruno was the most beloved wrestler. I mean, you couldn't believe when Bruno started bleeding and fell on the mat, people had heart attacks.
Yeah.
And died in the audience. That's how much he was loved. But I knew, I said, if anybody can get Bruno back, is going to be the next, a big star.
Yeah.
And also the business of the WWWF at the time was going down and down because they really didn't have anybody to fill Bruno's shoes. So I talked to Bruno about possibilities, and he thought about it. And then I talked to Vince McMahon Sr., and he thought about it, and he had a hard time with it because it was cliche for those days to be a 300-pound Ivan Koloff, George Steele. And Vince Sr. was the one who, I had the idea, but Vince Sr. was the one that had to open his checkbook and pay for the guard, and then eventually, rent Shea Stadium. You can imagine what that cost.
Yeah.
But I talked Bruno into it, and Bruno thought about it. And basically, history speaks for itself. It wound up happening. And there was a quote from Vince McMahon, Jr., and he quoted it, and it was perfectly correct. It was the feud that nobody saw coming. Because the way it was set up, it was like a mentor and his protege having a match. I just wanted to prove that I was worth something as Larry Zbyszko, not just Bruno's protege, a bottom guy.
If Bruno had said no, he didn't like the idea, was there a backup plan, like maybe Bob Backlund, turning on Bob Backlund, or it had to be Bruno?
Well, I didn't think of anybody else because really it had to be Bruno to get that big break, to get that crowd, because I knew, that would be the biggie. That was it. I mean, the guys at the other time, Backlund and them, they were okay, but they weren't that popular. They weren't a big draw. Great athletes, but they just weren't a big draw. The one guy that maybe could have carried it at that time was Ken Patera.
Okay.
Who was 280 in the Olympic weightlifting champion, very athletic guy that could have maybe took Bruno's place, but that never happened. But it had to be Bruno, and he agreed to do it because I think Bruno realized too, if he came back, everything would sell out. I mean, we sold out the Garden 3 times, every huge arena multiple times, culminating in Shea Stadium, which was for those days unheard of. Ridiculous. They turned thousands of people away because they wouldn't let chairs on the infield. That was like 45,000 people, which in those days was unheard of. And even the news, because the local news, sports news, never talked about wrestling. They didn't take wrestling seriously. But they talked about that. I remember the news, saying, hey, Shea Stadium sold out today, and you won't believe it. It wasn't the Mets. We'll be back. And but it just turned into be a classic. And also, if you look through the history of the changing of the eras, the me and Bruno feud was actually the last big feud of the old school. Shortly after that, the whole wrestling business changed because television changed. It went from the local territories to nationwide cable. So now the promoter, especially Vince Jr., who got the first jump on it, realized, well, the territories are coming to the end of their days. The WWWF, WWF, we're going to run the whole country, you know. So the business changed right after that. And it became the era of the characters where you didn't have like Luthez, Vern Gagne, Bruno Sammartino, you know, guys, just a name. You had characters. Everybody was a character. The Hulk, the Macho Man, the Hot Rod, the Superfly, you know, the this, the that. And plus the nationwide cable. And that's when the money started becoming more and more. And really, thanks to Vince McMahon, you know, the wrestling business is huge and worldwide, and now we're in a global network era. So Vince really, I mean, he's going to go down as the most amazing, best promoter that ever lived, because what wrestling was, you know, in the 50s and 60s and 70s compared to what it is today is amazing. I mean, it's really, in the WWE, I can't say enough, it's really a great company. It takes care of the guys, the work it does with charities. It supplies thousands of jobs for people, not just wrestlers, camera people, crew people, pyro people, truck driver, you know, in like 180 countries. It's amazing.
So if you were in your prime today, if Larry Zbyszko was in his prime in 2021, where would you fit in, say, in professional wrestling, do you think?
Well, I would definitely do the broadcasting because it doesn't hurt. But you know what, Lewis, I tell you, the Performance Center, the WWE Performance Center, where they train the new guys and NXT guys, is 7 miles down the road from my house.
Oh, okay.
So I enjoy going there once in a while, which hasn't been done for over a year because of the COVID stuff.
Sure.
And my buddy Terry Taylor is one of the finishing coaches there. Every Monday, I go to his house down the road and we watch Raw. So we know what's going on. And I'm watching these matches. And these guys, I mean, two things. One, they are amazing athletes. The stuff they can do athletically with jumping up to the top and flipping and crashing through tables or landing on a guy. And I mean, they're really amazing athletes. And they're doing dangerous stuff. I mean, you'll hear the crowds chant nowadays, holy shit, holy shit.
Yeah.
Because some of the stuff they do is amazing. The only problem is every match is like the same. Everybody's doing the same stuff. Everybody's running across the ring into a foot, thousands of clotheslines. You know, I mean, guy will run across, dive. You got two guys with their arms out ready to catch you. And because both guys are such great athletes doing such great stuff, nobody really hates anybody. How can you hate anybody if they do something really, you know, super athletic? So it's kind of like watching a car race, waiting for the wrecks, the bodies flying and wrecking, but there's not that emotional, oh, well, I hate you. Oh, God. I mean, it's really hard. And you watch some of these matches, and I don't know who the good guy and the bad guy is because they're both doing great stuff.
Well, yeah, they could be the top heel, say, will show up at an autograph signing and sign autographs and take pictures with people. Back in 1980, you would never do anything like that. You would never do that in 1980.
No, we would never. We wouldn't be in the same dressing room.
Yeah.
You know, none of that. And to be honest with you, if I was wrestling today, I'd much rather do the broadcasting because the stuff they're doing is dangerous. And to be honest with you, I was a tough wrestler.
Yeah.
And I was trained by guys in the old days. I mean, I know how to break your arm, break your neck, break your wrist, pop your knee, but you know, choke you out. But in terms of flipping and being like some of these, I'm not as athletic in terms of that as these guys are. And a lot of them are 210, 190 pounds. But you got some guys too that are 350 pounds that are diving over the top rope, flipping. I mean, you're doing dangerous stuff. To tell you the truth, I'd be afraid. I'd be scared to death to do some of the stuff they do. I don't know if I could take it today.
I mean, just think of the difference. And when you wrestled Bruno in Madison Square Garden, his first arm drag takedown, the place exploded just for an arm drag takedown. That was something else, man. And you
set it up right. One arm drag and the roof blew off Madison Square Garden. Nowadays, Yeah, I mean, these guys are falling 60 feet into a table or something, and the guy drags him in the ring and covers him 1, 2, and he kicks out. He should be dead.
Absolutely, absolutely. Even the match with Bruno, you hit him with the chair 3 times. How hard did you actually hit him? Because it looked like you hit him hard, but I think it looked a lot worse than it actually was.
Oh, well, thank you, because I barely touched him.
Okay, okay.
Thank you, but I'm glad you said that, Louis.
Yeah,
I hit him, but it was glancing because
okay.
I didn't want to hurt him, but I didn't want to. It had to look good.
I will admit the first 2 shots looked good. The second shot, you could tell, just glanced him across the top of the head. But he bladed himself pretty badly, didn't he? He bladed himself a couple of times.
Oh, I mean, he fell down, and I didn't see it at the time because I threw the chair down and left, and Tony Altimore came in. But when Bruno picked his head up, there was a pile of blood. It was on the cover of the magazines.
Yeah.
And it really, I mean, people in the building were shocked. I mean, and the funny, you want to hear an interesting thing?
Of course.
That was filmed when we did the TVs in those days at the Hamburg Field House in Hamburg, Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Now, this Saturday, there's an autograph convention at the Hamburg Field House in Hamburg, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
So I'm going to go there. Some guy talked me in, and because it was nostalgic to me, that's the building where we did TV, and I hit Bruno with the chair. I'm surprised the building's still there 40 years later. So this Saturday, I'm going to be at the Hamburg Field House with some other legends, and we'll be signing autographs.
Oh, it's
Things
great.
are starting to open up.
Yeah, that's I'm originally from Queens, New York, so maybe I come down one day. You'll be doing an autograph session, and I can get my book signed. Hopefully, one day. So when you go into the back, after you hit Bruno 3 times and you slammed the chair down, you left. Did anybody in the crowd say anything to you as you're walking back? And what
It was interesting because in those days people would go nuts. After I hit Bruno with the chair and slammed the chair and walked out, I noticed some fans sitting there, but you could hear a pin drop. They were in shock, and there was some ladies sitting there like with their mouth open, like they didn't believe what they saw. It took, when that TV show played that weekend, I drove my car to the town, and it didn't register on me yet, how much people hated me when they saw it on TV. I came out after the arena, my brand new Cadillac the lights were smashed, the windows were smashed, the mirrors were dangling down, the car was key scratched. I'm driving down the road with parts dangling and windows smashed. And I realized, oh my God, I mean, the heat was unbelievable. I used to have to go to buildings, hiding in guys' trunks of their car and sneak in the back, and because people, I mean, I was shot at leaving a building, followed down the road and tried to run off the road and stabbed in the ass.
Yeah, I was gonna say
it was.
I was gonna say you were stabbed, you were shot at, you were in a cab. I think in Boston that you said in your book that your cab was turned over. At any point did you think this is getting a little too crazy? Maybe you regretted turning on Bruno because your life was like in danger almost every night.
You know what? I didn't regret it because, I mean, the first few days, it threw me off, and I realized how much it was over. So what I realized was the idea I had and what Bruno did and what Vince McMahon Sr. did, it worked. It was the biggest thing to fans. So I was careful going in and out of buildings and stuff, but I was proud of people hating me because that was being the big heel of the day. It made my career. I milked that for 20 years.
I used to buy, when I would get my allowance, I would go get Inside Wrestling, Pro Wrestling Illustrated, The Wrestler. If your picture was in the magazine, I'd rip the picture out, throw it in the garbage. I would just tear the picture out, except there was one picture that I kept. There was a picture of the cover of Bruno choking you, your foot caught in the rope. And Bruno, as a guy tried to kill Larry Zbyszko. And I'm like, good.
Yeah. But talking about Queens, You were from Queens. One time I met Mike Tyson.
Okay.
And I was never a big boxing fan, but Muhammad Ali, when I was a kid, I loved him. And Mike Tyson, when he came around, he was an animal. I liked watching him. And I met him at one convention some years ago. And I went, oh, God, Mike Tyson's there. So I went over to introduce myself. And when I got there, and he was there with a few people, I went, hey, Iron Mike. I said, hey, my name is, and before I could say anything, Mike Tyson goes, Larry Zbyszko, you bastard. Oh, how could you hit Bruno in the head with a chair? I hated you when I was a kid. And, you know, because he grew up in Brooklyn or Queens or something. And he was a big wrestling fan and a big Bruno fan. And he caught me off guard. I cracked up. He goes, oh, I hated you when I was a kid.
I know. I mean, I think you had a match with Backlund at the Garden. I think you won because Backlund was bleeding too much. They had to stop the match. My grandfather used to get the results in New York Post, and I remember going over to his house when that son of a bitch Zbyszko beat Bob Backlund. He couldn't believe it. He was just so mad. He would bang his fist. Someone's got to get Zbyszko. It's a great stuff, man. Great stuff.
That's what made the business, you know, great in them days. That, you know, fans going berserk. They loved it.
Absolutely, man. I wish I could go back. It felt like it was yesterday you turned on Bruno. I can't believe it was like, what, 40 years ago?
40 years ago, and I'm still here. You know, I'm freaking out because, God, a bunch of guys I knew are all dead. They died in 61. Animal died. Orndorff died.
Yeah.
Don Cardullo died. I got a couple of personal friends that were 70 that died. I'm going, my God. And I'm lucky. I mean, my health is great.
That's good.
You know, I was lucky. I never got into drugs. You know, back in the 80s, tried a little this and that, but never got into it. Never drank alcohol my whole life.
That's good. That's good.
I think alcohol is a big problem with health after years of drinking. Like Ric Flair almost died twice.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, but he was drinking every day. You know, I mean, you can't do that.
Speaking
so I've been lucky, but go ahead.
I didn't mean to cut you off. I thought you finished, but I said, speaking of Ric Flair, you never had a match with Ric Flair, did you? I was trying to find a match between you and Ric Flair. You've never wrestled Ric Flair.
Never did. And it's an interesting story because I was supposed to. And when the action figures, this is interesting. When the action figures first start coming out, like 1985, the AWA, had a pack of action figures that came 2 in a pack.
Yeah. Okay.
It'd be like, Greg Gagne, Jim Brunzell, and some. But the pack that came out with me, my doll was in it from when I was in the AWA, and the doll in the pack with me was Ric Flair, who was in the NWA. And here's the story, because when Vince took off, with the new era, and saw the nationwide cable coming, the Crockett's and the Gagnes tried to work together to run some shows.
Yeah.
They ran the Meadowlands and some other towns and stuff. So they had this idea where, some of AWA guys would wrestle some of the NWA guys, which was never done before. So they wanted me to, go on ESPN, because that's where the AWA was, and do a couple interviews challenging Ric Flair and bad-mouthing Ric Flair. Mm-hmm. And then Ric Flair was going to come back on TBS and badmouth me and cuss me out and all that stuff. And then one of the groups were doing, the other association was going to crash the party and start a feud. And then they were going to promote shows where the AWA guys were wrestling the NWA guys. So I was supposed to be having a big feud with Flair. Okay. And that's why the dolls came out with me and Flair. And that didn't work because at the last minute, there was too many cooks and it fell apart. But then they came out with another set with me and Bockwinkel. Okay. But the interesting part is that idea that they were going to do back then in 85 or so, 10, 11 years later, that was the invasion idea that became the New World Order, where we made it look like the WWE guys were invading WCW. That was where the idea came from.
Okay. Okay, your opinion on Hulk Hogan, and when I know Hulk Hogan took on Andre the Giant at Shea Stadium. When do you remember meeting Hulk Hogan for the first time? What was your initial thoughts on Hogan? Do you know he was going to be a big star?
Hulk, well, I was doing the Bruno thing, and I was kind of like the big star at the time. And they had Andre in, but Andre was an attraction.
Yeah,
he didn't work a territory all the time. He'd be in the New York territory for 2 months and hit all the towns, and then Vince Sr. would book him in other territories and then book him in Japan because he was really too big to have as your main champion because who the hell could beat him? They wouldn't draw money after a while.
Yeah.
But Andre, when he was in the WWF, they needed an opponent for him that was big. So, here comes the new guy, Hulk Hogan.
Yeah.
And Terry, Hulk was a big guy.
Yeah.
He was 6'6", 6'7", 300 and some pounds, looked great. And for a big guy, Hulk was very athletic. He had great balance. He could move good. So they needed a big guy to wrestle Andre every night. So for a few months, Hulk would wrestle Andre every night in some other town. Andre beat the crap out of him. And I remember one time at the Garden, Hulk came up to me and he said, "Larry, let me ask you some advice. Can you give me some advice? Because I'm really getting sick and tired of Andre beating me up every night in every town, And even as big as Hulk is, next to Andre, he didn't look big. Andre was ridiculous.
Yeah.
And I gave him, the advice I gave him was, I said, Hulk, I said, you're such a big guy, you move great. I said, my advice to you would be to give your notice, talk to Vince and go to another territory. Because if you stay in one territory too long and you get beat every night, then you become like, yeah, okay, he gets beat every night. So he wound up going to another territory. I don't know if it was my advice or it just worked out that way, and he wound up in the AWA. And it was the Gagnes who kind of went against the golden rule where they made Hulk Hogan a good guy, which was unheard of in those days because he was so big. Usually the big guys were the bad guys, because human nature is to root for the underdog. So the good guys were usually smaller than the bad guys. But they made Hulk a good guy. And he was smart enough to know how to talk, and come up with this little thing and connect with the crowd. So Terry was kind of the right guy that came along at the right time when the business and things were changing.
Yeah, I think
he was a smart guy.
I think because of the success of Rocky III, I think maybe that's why they made him, because the fans were cheering for him anyway because the success of Rocky III. So I think maybe there's that
that helped too. The first time wrestlers were in movies. Before that, you wouldn't see really wrestlers in movies.
That's true. That's true. One thing I've always was curious about. I mean, back then in the WWF, a heel was usually paired with Grand Wizard, Fred Blassie, or Lou Albano. You turned heel. You remained solo. You didn't take on a manager. Is there a reason why you stayed by yourself without a manager?
Yeah, basically because one of the reasons they had managers was because they would bring big, scary guys in, like Tanaka, Fuji, Killer Kowalski, George Steele, Animal, Ivan Koloff. So they'd give them a manager because the managers could talk good. The managers were more of a mouthpiece. And I didn't want a manager because I wanted to do my own interviews. And I was just kind of lucky, and I was a natural at bullshit. I could do great interviews, and I liked, doing the interviews myself and getting everything hating me instead of being associated with one of the managers at that time. So I never really had a manager. The NWA, gave me Baby Doll once as like a valet a little bit. But I wanted to do my own talking, and I could talk good, thank God. Talking was really most of the battle. When you got done talking, people wanted to kill you.
Of course.
When I walked into the ring, they already hated me.
Okay, of course, because you cut very good promos. I will admit, I'm watching your
Yeah.
promos again on YouTube. You cut really good promos, especially against Bruno. I wanted to reach through the screen and just choke you, man, when I'm watching the promo. But I mentioned Lou Albano. Lou Albano was quite a character. Do you have any good Captain Lou Albano stories?
You know, Captain Lou was a cartoon. I mean, and he was like, I don't know, workable, but he used to hang out with like Tony Altimore. And Tony Altimore I think they partnered for a while, but then Lou became a manager and Altimore did some refereeing and some stuff. I think they were a tag team, the Sicilians, maybe, before that in the 50s, 60s. But Albano was kind of crazy in a lovable way for us. But I mean, we were in a restaurant one time, and me and Garea at one table eating, and a couple tables away we see Captain Lou and Altimore eating. And it's a nice restaurant in New York. And all of a sudden, you can see Altimore saying something to Lou and pointing to people at the table next to him, saying stuff like, "Hey, I think those people are knocking you, Lou," and saying wrestling's not real and all that. And Captain Albano now is getting, like, you could see him, me and Tony are looking at each other going, "Oh God, oh no." Sure enough, so Albano gets up, walks over to the other table with the guy, zips down his pants, and pees on him in the restaurant. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that no one else would ever even think of doing, that the Captain Albano would do, and somehow get away with it. They would politely ask him to leave. The guy's getting peed on in the restaurant. Oh my God, me and Garea are just shaking our heads. He was a character.
I remember when you and Garea beat the Yukon Lumberjacks to win the tag team titles. The crowd erupted, but Albano kept jumping into the ring, and you kept knocking him down. He'd roll out, walk, pace back and forth, jump back in the ring, and you just knock him down again. Like, what is he doing? Just stay out of the ring. You kept knocking him down, but it was quite a character.
He was on a borderline of being a lovable, insane guy.
Yeah, absolutely. I did meet him a few times, and he was a nice guy to meet. I talked to him a few times. A great guy.
Yeah.
But back to Shea Stadium. Of course, you're in the main event. I've always wondered, Bob Backlund didn't defend his title. It was a mega card, super card, but he didn't defend his title on that show. It was him and Pedro Morales against the Samoans. Any reason why the decision was made not to have Backlund defend his title, defend the WWF title, that you would know offhand?
God, to be honest with you, I really don't know. I mean,
okay.
Me and Bruno, we would have sold out Shea Stadium if there was no other matches there at all. And I didn't pay any attention to what was going on. They probably just had Bob in a tag match because why lose the glamour of the championship belt when he wasn't the main event? And even at that time when Hulk wrestled Andre at Shea, it was already after 3 months of Hulk beating him. Of Andre beating him every night. So it was just basically another match. But I really didn't pay mind.
I was going to say, what were your thoughts on Backlund as champion?
Well, Bob was a super athlete. He was really a great athlete. He worked out hard. He was much stronger than he looked, because he looked like, really like 220-pound guy, but in super shape and a good wrestler. But when you looked at Bob, you had to realize the wrestling audience was used to guys that looked like Bruno, that looked like Koloff, that looked like George Steele. So to the fans, Bob Backlund looked like Howdy Doody. Gorilla Monsoon used to call him Howdy Doody in the dressing room. He'd say, "Okay, Howdy Doody, you're up next." And Bob would get up, and get ready to go. He just didn't, as good as he was athletically and wrestling, he just didn't look the part. People couldn't believe in a guy like him after a guy like Bruno. He just didn't look the part. It wasn't his fault,
And you came up with the idea of taking the title from Backlund, I believe. I believe you said that in the book. I read the book a while ago, but you spoke to McMahon Sr. about taking the title, but he refused to do that.
Yeah, we had some meetings, and I wanted to get the belt off Backlund, beat Backlund for the belt, because I thought that, and this was right before the Shea Stadium thing. I thought that would maybe make Shea Stadium mean more and get the most out of it. But actually, it wound up, it didn't matter. And Vince Sr., he was probably right and said, you really, but keep the belt on, Bob, because you really don't need it because you got so much heat now anyway. And so Vince was right about that. And we also knew that after that, Bruno was going to go back to retirement. So it wasn't like Bruno wanted to win a belt, So they just kind of left it on Bob. And I had so much heat, I really didn't need it. But I did have that idea to want it. Who wouldn't,
Well, you actually had in '77, you had a couple of shots against superstar Billy Graham for the WWF title. What do you remember about those matches and your thoughts on superstar Billy Graham?
Oh, God, he was a character. I mean, I wrestled him some matches, and he wasn't much of a wrestler. He was basically a bodybuilder.
Yeah.
But because I was as good as I was and he did his thing, it was really what we would call a night off. But it was funny because Billy never liked to go a long time. So Skolin, well, you guys got a 20-minute time limit out there. But after 10 minutes, Billy Graham's saying, okay, that's it for me. I'm done.
Okay.
I'm looking at him. He goes, don't worry, I'll take all the heat. But it was easy working with the guy because he couldn't do much. And then, like I said, it wasn't like today where we're flying around and flipping and catching. So Billy was a character, but he was more of a bodybuilder than he was a wrestler. So to have a good match with Billy, the other guy had to be good.
So in your opinion, do you think McMahon should have kept the title on Billy Graham because I know he wanted to keep the title instead of giving it to Backlund? You think that would have been the better option, in your opinion?
Well, at the time, maybe, because Billy really was the first guy that came into the business that was in the beginning of the steroid days,
Okay.
Where Muscle Beach came into sports. And no one in those days realized what steroids were. I mean, the Russians were using it in the Olympics since the 30s and 40s. No one knew. And it wasn't like an illegal substance. No one realized the long-term damage it would do to athletes that, abuse this stuff. They just knew if you took steroids, you'd get bigger and look ridiculous. So the business changed to where a lot of guys came in that looked so surrealistic that, but the art of wrestling was getting lost. And then they invented the clothesline and that. So it was the look where, again, to follow Bruno, I mean, in those days with Billy Graham, you'd have to have somebody big and tough looking, like a Ken Patera, I always thought, could maybe have followed him because Ken was like a Bruno looking kind of guy and an Olympic athlete and athletic, so, but, until like Bob Backlund, no, Ken Patera, maybe, but there wasn't too many guys that were there to follow in Bruno's footsteps because Bruno looked so ridiculous. Strength-wise and believability.
Absolutely, man. So you have a great story on how you met Bruno for the first time. You actually trespassed on his property, I believe. So why don't you go ahead, in case people aren't familiar, why don't you go ahead and tell that story? That's a hilarious story.
I was a stalker.
Okay.
You know what? I was a big wrestling fan. I was born on the south side of Chicago.
Yeah.
And I think when I was 12 years old, my dad got transferred with U.S. Steel to Pittsburgh. He was an international tax accountant, and U.S. Steel headquarters was now in Pittsburgh. So 12 years old, I moved to Pittsburgh, and I remember the movie on the movie marquee was Goldfinger.
Okay.
That might have been like 1964 or something like that. And that's the first time I ever saw wrestling was in Pittsburgh. It was Channel 11, studio wrestling, Jumpin' Johnny DeFazio, Hurricane Hunt, local guys, but then Bruno Sammartino. And when I saw Bruno, I became a huge Bruno fan. Like, oh my God, look at this guy.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to be a wrestler after becoming a Bruno fan. So I started wrestling in 8th grade in Pittsburgh, which Pennsylvania was one of the states years ago that had an early wrestling program. And I wrestled then in high school, and I wrestled a couple of years for Penn State, amateur. In between wrestling seasons, I did martial arts, Ishinru karate, because I wanted to be a professional wrestler and, be as good as I could. And then when I was 16, I got my driver's, license.
Okay.
And a $300 piece of crap Ford Falcon for my first car. And I would drive off down the road, and my mother did volunteer work at a high school where Bruno's kids, at a grade school,
where
Bruno's kids went to school. And my mom found out his address, which turned out to be a few miles down from our house. Oh, you gotta be kidding. I know where Bruno lives. So sometimes when I went that direction, I'd go off the side road and I'd drive past Bruno's house.
Okay.
Seeing if I got to, look at Bruno. And one day I drove by, and it was hard to see because his whole backyard had big, high, hedges around it. Some of it had a fence, and some of it had these big, high hedges. And for a second, I caught a glimpse of Bruno standing outside by his pool, getting a tan. Standing there getting a tan. I couldn't help it. I stopped the car, and I didn't know how to get in. I just wanted to meet him. So I started crawling through his hedges. And I'm making noise. And I remember when my head was coming out of the hedges and I'm coming out, Bruno's standing there by the pool, and he looks over and he's probably thinking, oh God, here comes some goofy kid. This is of mine. And I got twigs sticking out of my head and, thorns on me. And I basically walked over and looked at Bruno, and my God, when you got close to the man, God. But I introduced myself and was very humble and polite, and that's how I met him. And then there was a couple of times I drove by and saw him again and just jumped out and said hi. And then he was impressed with my wrestling, amateur wrestling background. And this was a time when his career, he slowed down in terms of wrestling every day at the high schools and just would fly out and do the big arenas. Mm-hmm. So he was home a lot during the week. And I started working out with him in his basement and did the same Bruno workout. And probably started when I was like 17, 18, working out with him. And when I was 21 and started in the business, I weighed like 240, 245. But I bench pressed, because Bruno was big on working the chest stuff. I bench pressed 465 and a half pounds at 240. That's pretty good. Not strong, and I had that kind of Bruno look as I did his workout with him.
Yeah.
And as we were working out, he would be talking to me about the psychology and of the business. So I learned a lot, and he didn't have to help me, but it just worked out that way, Louis.
Yeah, I mean, weren't you afraid that he was gonna see you, grab you in a bear hug, and just take you outside and just drop you into the street or something?
He was a good guy.
Yeah, I know.
Look, Bruno, you knew he wouldn't hurt you. You knew he was a great guy. So I wasn't worried about that. I just couldn't help it.
You had to. Yeah.
I just thought he'd be nice and never see me again.
No, it's great stuff. Great stuff there. So July. I always wanted to ask you this. July of 1980, the NWA had their own big turn. Ole Anderson turned on Dusty Rhodes. I'm sure you're familiar with that. Do you think the success of your turn on Bruno influenced the NWA to have their own big turn a few months later? Or
you know what? I really don't know, because I wasn't there.
Okay.
To be honest with you, it might have just been, it could have been something, they saw and went, hey, it worked up there. Why don't we do this here? But to be honest with you, because I was up there, in the days of the territories, and there was no cell phone, no social media, no wrestling dirt sheets. So no one knew anything of what was going on, if you were in New York, you got all the publicity because of the magazines. So after the magazine Bruno thing, I could go to the NWA, the AWA, Japan, and everybody already knew about me. But I really didn't know what was going on in the other territories because I wasn't there. And like I said, there was no social media. No one knew nothing about anywhere else.
Okay.
Different world.
Fair enough. There's a chapter in your book that I wanted to ask you a question about. It's the chapter called Love. It's a very short chapter. Let me just get to it here.
It was very humorous, I thought.
Yeah, no, it made me laugh out loud. Let me get page 71.
After 8, I think.
Yeah, here we go. Actually, you have a great picture. Anyone see? Great picture of you with the mustache there.
Oh, I had that mustache once, yeah, but it didn't last long, and I thought I looked stupid.
The whole chapter is just love and the wrestling business do not mix, period, the end. Do you care to elaborate on that, or should we just leave it at that?
Well, it just dawned on me. I was writing a book and got to a point about relationships with wrestling. Because Bruno and even the other old timers would warn you when you were 21, young, getting into business, don't get married.
Okay.
Wrestling, because, you weren't home. You were always driving to a different town every night. Or you'd say, hey, I'm going to Japan for a 6-week tour. And so to have a wife and kid and never be home wasn't a good, marriage kind of lifestyle.
Yeah.
Of course, I didn't listen. I got married. And that's kind of what happened. It was a mutual nice, divorce thing, but I was just never home. So, poor Marilyn cracked up and took the baby and went back to Iowa. And then I was single till I was about 36 but because I was writing a book and I just went, let me just give everybody a bit of knowledge if they can make sense of it.
Yeah.
Love and the wrestling business do not mix.
There we go. Period.
Because you're never there.
End of story.
Yeah.
So your son is actually a wrestler right now, Tim Zbyszko. You actually got to team with him, and technically, how gratifying was that you got to team with your son?
Well, I did a couple matches with him, and it was, it was cool because it was, my kid, and me. And I was getting older, so I didn't do too much, but I did it. The guys we were wrestling, I could outsmart and do it. And Tim does very good. He's a natural talker.
Yeah.
I mean, he can do great talking. And then he got himself a job. I mean, he tried some indies, and he's still thinking about maybe hoping to do something with the WWE, maybe. But he's 39 years old now, so it's getting to the point of now or never.
Yeah.
But I'm really so afraid to push him hard or try, because what the guys are doing today, like we talked about, is really such dangerous stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Tim started working out at this school in Orlando with Scott Hall's kid, Cody Hall.
Cody Hall, yeah.
They started working out together, and and this was 8 years ago or 9 years ago. But I was just always worried about him getting hurt. And Cody Hall, a couple of years after that, broke his neck in Japan, I think it was. And I didn't want Tim to break his neck.
Yeah, of course.
Because the business was changing into a different form of entertainment. We're putting a hold on a guy and doing a move and an arm drag is one thing, but flipping off and then landing on metal chairs and tables is another thing.
Yeah, of course. And death matches now that whether you staple guns,
they beat the crap out of each other.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really brutal.
Yeah, if you ask me,
he does the weekend shows. I said that's fine, but get it. Just keep your job. He's got a good job. And wrestle the weekends. I mean, if you went to WWE, and it's weird for me because if I try to push him, and there was a point where the WWE said, look, we don't want anybody more, kids, because everybody they had there was someone's kid. Orton's kid, a couple other people had 2 kids, the Samoans' kids. Everybody wrestling for, the WWE was someone's kid. So, and then the other guys would resent, oh, he only got a job because Larry, called in.
Yeah.
So it's kind of weird. So I stay out of it, and he does his thing. He's a man, but he's got a good job, and then he does weekend stuff, and I just don't want him to get hurt.
No, fair enough. You're a good dad. Larry.
Yeah.
You're a good dad. So last question, and then we can wrap this up. After everything that's happened in your career with the Bruno, WCW, AWA, is there anything that you change, or if you could do it all again, you do it all again?
You know what? To be honest with you, the only thing I'd change is I wouldn't have got married the first time because love and the wrestling business don't mix.
End of story.
But
period.
I really can't complain because my dream of being like Bruno worked out, setting a historical moment with Chase Stadium and a feud that no one saw coming worked out. And then the last 10 years of broadcasting, especially with the New World Order, publicity and reaching new generations at 45 and 50 years old when other guys my age were already faded out and gone.
Yeah.
So my career was really a blessing. I really wouldn't have changed anything. I just wouldn't have gotten married when I was in my 20s.
Okay.
It just wasn't, it don't mix. That's the chapter.
That chapter, yeah. Well, I'll remember that chapter.
Advice to anybody who wants to be a wrestler, that's the chapter.
That's the chapter they should read first. Okay. Larry, I just want to say it's been an absolute honor and privilege to talk to you today. Thank you so much for the memories. And again, it felt like yesterday I hated your guts, but you're a great guy, and it was an honor talking to you today.
Well, thank you, Louis. I appreciate it. And again, I love talking to fans. I hate to talk too much because I don't want to take the mystique away from them, So, the wrestling business is magnificent entertainment. And the athletes are really amazing athletes, and they're doing dangerous stuff. So I'm glad that they invented all this stuff now after I got out of the ring.
There you go. You go. Yeah,
but fans, to wrestling fans, that my dream came true, and I think I said it in my Hall of Fame speech when I was brain dead because it came from a different dimension. But
yeah,
I hope all the wrestling fans, I hope all their dreams come true too. Well, I love you all. Thank you for my life.
Thank you. I love you too, Larry. I love you as well. Again, honor and privilege talking to you today. So I'm going to close it up. And if you could hold on for a second, I just want to talk to you real quick before you go. So I just want to say thank you, everyone, for listening to me today, listening to us today. This has been the Alliance Pro Wrestling Network special interview. Again, my guest, the living legend, the one and only Larry Zbyszko. And until next time, thank you very much. Take care. Bye-bye. Stay safe, everyone. So long. Bye-bye.